Tell us what you really think, because no, I think that's a really interesting view. And what are you expecting then, say, from Westpac and ANZ?
Well, I'm sure they'll come out with similar growth figures and similar profit figures, because at the moment the housing market is, whilst teetering, there hasn't been widespread defaults. But looking at the statistics and clearance rates and house prices, in Perth they're down 6-7%, 10% real terms. Melbourne's down about 3%, but 5-6% real terms and 50% clearance rates. The market's looking horrendous. They've got $300 billion of housing loans on their balance sheet, Commonwealth Bank more. This is not the time to be bumping up your lending book when potentially entering a housing bubble, which virtually in every other country in the world has popped. As Jeremy Grantham notes, the two that haven't is Australia and the UK. So why be levering up in a time of great uncertainty is a humongous risk for shareholders' capital.
All right,
of course, you'll get paid either way.
OK, well, that's on Friday. Now, Adam Schwab, what's your view about the company management has been very strong, and Alan Joyce has put a very strong view that the trouble with the unions is certainly costing the company a great deal, but that it's not a sustainable position for the unions long-term if they want a healthy and sustainable Qantas?
Oh, I think that's right, Helen. I think, as we said a couple of weeks ago, you feel for the Qantas management, you feel for the Qantas workers. It's not a great situation for anyone. It's an important brand to Australia for tourism, for many reasons. And I don't think anybody wants this situation to continue indefinitely. But obviously there's a bit of an impasse. Qantas workers are among the best paid globally, and airlines are difficult businesses. So we certainly have sympathy for both positions.
All right. Lachlan, what's your view? Because they've cancelled something like 500 flights. Would have a view, I'm sure, on that. I mean, James Packer had a big go about the two strikes rule, and he seemed to be saying that it was completely farcical in a company like Crown. The management and the board, he said, weren't allowed to vote against the remuneration, or either way for the remuneration report. So it left something like 18% only of shares that could be voted for. It passed the 50% vote. So if it happens again next year, he said, well, I'll just use my 46% shareholding to vote all those directors straight back in again. So is that a farce? Is he right?
I think I've sort of said this a few times on this show and Janine's show, that the two strikes rule itself is a toothless tiger, because you get two strikes and the board will get voted back in anyway. But I think there's the benefit of the two strikes rule is just to focus media attention on bad pay practices, and in that sense it's quite a handy little tool. But I think you've got to look at, there's two sorts of companies. There's companies that have a controlling shareholder or a founding shareholder, and you'd say that's the case for Crown, even though James Packer didn't found it. But or a company like News Corp, the same. Rupert Murdoch's obviously always controlled it, or Keith before him, and a company like Village Roadshow with the Kirby's control. And compare that to a company like BHP or Wesfarmers.
Sure.
And they're two very different cases. If you're looking at a company like News Corp, if you buy a share in News Corp, you get what you pay for. You're buying into a company controlled by Rupert. Don't expect to have pay practices that are good. Don't expect good corporate governance. Bad luck. You buy a company like BHP or Wesfarmers, I think it's a different expectation, because those directors are representing the independent shareholders. So yes. I actually do kind of, in a sense, agree with James, despite my corporate governance bent, agree with James in this case. James Packer himself doesn't take any salary as well. He can appoint directors off his own whim. So in this case, it pretty much is a fair fee. But you look at other instances, and you've seen some strikes over the last week or two, Pac Brands and
GUD,
yep. On top of my head. And in those cases, the two strikes rule and the corporate governance practice should be looked at more closely, because they're very poor corporate governance practices. So I think Packer's right for Crown, but we shouldn't extrapolate that to meaning it's right for everyone.
Okay, so much broader based, shareholder based companies, perhaps, really this is what this two strikes rule is aimed at.
I think, as I've said a couple of times, instead of having a two-strike rule, the government would be far better off changing the rule that if the remuneration report's voted down, the chairman doesn't get paid. And as I said, you guarantee you won't get any remuneration reports ever voted down. Yeah,
no, good point. All right, just do you have a view about this, James Packer's voice in this, the pokies debate and the reforms there? He does add a huge amount of clout, I suppose, to the club's view. Is this a doomed piece of legislation for Andrew Wilkie and the government?
We certainly hope not. I think it's a fantastic piece of legislation. Anything that reduces the destructive burden of gambling on some of the poorest parts of the community is a good thing. And James Packer's talking up his own book, so good on him for doing so. That's his job. But I think Australia will be a far better place if the legislation does come in, and good on Wilkie for pushing it. And good on Julie Gillard for going with it.
Okay, we've only got a couple of minutes, but